"Ma'am, we don't hand out free meals here," Emily Carter said loudly enough for everyone in the diner to hear, her voice slicing through the lunchtime chatter with practiced certainty. Conversation slowed. A father paused halfway through lifting a fry to his son. A waitress froze beside the coffee station. Even the old jukebox humming in the corner suddenly felt quieter. The woman standing at the register didn't argue. She didn't sigh. She simply looked up, meeting Emily's eyes with a calm that somehow made the accusation sound even harsher. Naomi Brooks wore faded blue jeans, white sneakers, and a charcoal hoodie zipped halfway to her neck. There were no designer bags, no jewelry announcing wealth, no security detail waiting outside. To anyone walking into Brooks' family diner that afternoon, she looked like another tired customer hoping for a quick lunch before getting back to work. That appearance was intentional. For months, anonymous customer complaints had quietly accumulated on Naomi's desk. Some spoke about cold food. Others mentioned rude service. A handful hinted at something darker, customers claiming they were treated differently because of how they looked. Naomi had read every report herself. Instead of sending executives or consultants, she decided to see the truth with her own eyes. She stepped fully inside the diner she had built from a single neighborhood restaurant into one of the fastest-growing family dining brands in the Midwest. The familiar scent of grilled onions, fresh coffee, and buttered toast greeted her like an old memory. Years earlier, she had worked behind a counter almost identical to this one, learning every station before she ever signed a business contract. That history mattered to her. It reminded her that respect was never supposed to depend on a paycheck or a title. Emily barely glanced at the menu board. "What'll it be?" she asked flatly, already tapping her screen without waiting. "Turkey sandwich," Naomi answered with a gentle smile. "Sweet potato fries. Unsweetened iced tea." Emily raised one eyebrow. "You paying with cash?" The question landed differently than it would have for anyone else. Naomi noticed two customers glance toward her before quickly looking away. She calmly reached into her pocket and placed a simple black bank card on the counter. Emily picked it up between two fingers as though inspecting something suspicious. Beside her, Jason Miller leaned over just enough to see. A crooked grin spread across his face before he whispered something that made Emily laugh under her breath. Naomi pretended not to notice. She accepted her receipt, thanked them politely, and walked toward a booth near the drink station where she could see both registers without attracting attention. Outside, sunlight poured through the front windows, warming the polished wooden tables she had personally chosen years before. Families laughed. Plates clattered. The diner looked exactly the way she had always dreamed it would. Yet behind the counter, something felt different. Emily glanced toward Naomi again, then leaned closer to Jason. Their smiles faded into expressions that carried something colder than impatience. Naomi lifted her iced tea, settled quietly into her seat, and waited, unaware that the next few minutes would reveal far more than the quality of the food. Naomi Brooks wrapped both hands around the cold plastic cup of iced tea and quietly watched the rhythm behind the counter. Years of building restaurants had taught her that every dining room had two stories. One belonged to the customers. The other lived where they rarely looked, behind the register, behind the kitchen doors, behind smiles that disappeared the moment guests turned away. Emily Carter glanced toward Naomi's booth before leaning closer to Jason Miller. They spoke in low voices, convinced the lunchtime crowd was loud enough to hide every word. They were wrong. "I told you," Jason muttered with a smirk. "She probably came in because she heard we give leftovers away at closing." Emily laughed through her nose without looking up from the register. "Did you see that hoodie? She's ordering like she owns the place." Jason tapped the touchscreen twice before lowering his voice even further. "Mark it low priority. We take care of real customers first." Emily didn't hesitate. One quick tap. A small yellow icon appeared beside Naomi's order. Low priority. Naomi saw it from across the room. She didn't react. Instead, she slowly stirred the ice in her cup as if she hadn't noticed. Around her, the diner continued breathing normally. Plates landed on tables. Coffee poured into white mugs. Children laughed over milkshakes. To everyone else, Brooks' family diner looked warm and welcoming. But behind the counter, another atmosphere had quietly taken over. 5 minutes passed. A middle-aged white couple walked in after Naomi. Emily greeted them with a bright smile that hadn't existed moments earlier. "Welcome. What can I get started for you today?" Her voice carried warmth now. Jason even offered them fresh pie before they ordered. Naomi watched the interaction without blinking. The couple paid, thanked the staff, and found a booth near the windows. Their food ticket immediately printed ahead of hers. Then came a construction worker still wearing a dusty orange safety vest. Jason greeted him by name. Another ticket printed. Again, before Naomi's. She counted silently. 1 order. 2. 3. Hers remained untouched. Olivia Bennett, a freelance photographer eating lunch alone near the front window, noticed the sequence. She glanced toward Naomi's receipt, then toward the kitchen screen. Her forehead tightened slightly, but she said nothing. Not yet. Behind the drink station, Emily folded her arms and nodded toward Naomi again. Think she'll complain? She whispered. Jason shrugged. People like that always do eventually. Emily smirked. Then Rachel can deal with it. Almost on cue, assistant manager Rachel Simmons stepped from the office carrying inventory sheets. Emily leaned toward her and quietly explained something while occasionally pointing toward Naomi's booth. Rachel didn't even bother looking closely. She simply folded the papers under one arm and gave a dismissive nod before walking away. Naomi noticed every second of it. She had seen this pattern before, not just in restaurants, but in hotels, banks, and boardrooms. Bias rarely announced itself. It disguised itself as procedure. It wore the uniform of policy. It smiled while making excuses. Then Jason looked toward the kitchen pass and called out just loud enough for Emily to hear. Don't rush booth 12. She can wait. Both of them chuckled. In the kitchen, Marcus Hill paused while placing fresh turkey onto the grill. He looked at the ticket hanging above the prep station, then at the growing stack of newer orders already moving ahead of it. Something about the sequence didn't make sense. His eyes narrowed, and for the first time that afternoon, he stopped cooking long enough to wonder whether the real problem in the diner wasn't the food at all. Marcus Hill pulled Naomi's ticket from the rail and frowned. It had been hanging there nearly 12 minutes, longer than any lunch order should. Fresh turkey sizzled across the flat-top grill, while sweet potato fries browned in clean oil beside it. There was no reason for the delay, none except the one he had already begun to suspect. He assembled the sandwich with practiced care, layering crisp lettuce, sliced tomatoes, and freshly carved turkey before placing it onto the pass. Booth 12, he called toward the front. Jason walked over, glanced at the plate, then shook his head. Leave it. Marcus looked up. It's ready. I said leave it. Jason slid 2 newer tickets ahead of Naomi's order without the slightest hesitation. Those tables are more important. Marcus's jaw tightened. They ordered after her. Jason shrugged as though fairness were optional. Management's decision. The words settled heavily inside the kitchen. Marcus had worked at Brooks Family Diner for 6 years. He knew the company's standards almost by heart. Orders were served in sequence. Guests were treated equally. Every employee signed the same policy during orientation. Yet what he was watching had nothing to do with company policy. It had everything to do with personal judgment. Out in the dining room, Naomi quietly watched another family receive their meals. She smiled politely when a little girl accidentally made eye contact with her. The child smiled back before returning to her chicken tenders. Naomi's own table remained empty except for a melting cup of ice. Emily approached booth 12 carrying only a refill pitcher. Need anything? She asked without warmth. Naomi looked up pleasantly. Just wondering about my lunch. Emily forced a smile that never reached her eyes. Kitchen's backed up. Naomi nodded once. I understand. Emily turned away before the sentence had fully ended. The moment she reached the register, Jason chuckled. Still waiting? Emily laughed quietly. Maybe she'll leave before we have to serve her. Rachel Simmons stepped out again, reviewing staffing notes. Jason gestured toward Naomi. She's asking about the food now. Rachel barely glanced across the room. Tell her we're busy. Even though we aren't. Marcus called from the kitchen before he could stop himself. 3 heads turned toward him. Rachel's expression hardened. Focus on cooking, Marcus. The meal's already done. Rachel folded her arms. Then it'll go out when I say it goes out. Silence followed. Not the peaceful silence of a neighborhood diner, but the heavy kind that settled before something broke. Olivia Bennett lowered her coffee mug. She had now watched 3 separate tables receive meals ordered after Naomi's. Her photographers I noticed details others ignored, the untouched receipt, the repeated glances, the uncomfortable body language. Something was wrong. Then Jason walked back into the kitchen and looked directly at Naomi's plate. Actually, he said with a grin, those fries have been sitting too long. He picked up a handful and tossed them into the trash. Give her the old batch from the warmer. Marcus stared at him. Those have been sitting for almost an hour. Jason smirked. She won't know the difference. Emily laughed from the front counter. Or maybe she will. Doesn't matter. Marcus looked from the stale fries to the woman patiently waiting in booth 12. For the first time since joining the company, he felt embarrassed to be wearing the Brooks family diner uniform. And across the dining room, Naomi Brooks watched every move without saying a single word, her calm expression hiding the disappointment slowly settling behind her eyes. Marcus reached for the tray before Jason could touch it again. No, he said quietly but firmly. I'm not serving food that's been sitting for an hour. The kitchen seemed to freeze. The hiss of the grill suddenly sounded louder than the conversations drifting in from the dining room. Jason stared at him for a moment before letting out a short laugh. You planning to be a hero now? Marcus didn't answer. Instead, he dumped the stale fries into the trash, grabbed a clean basket, and lowered a fresh batch into the fryer. Golden bubbles rushed to the surface. You're wasting food, Jason snapped. I'm following company standards, Marcus replied without raising his voice. Jason rolled his eyes and walked back toward the register. Suit yourself. Emily looked over as he approached. What's taking so long? Marcus is acting like the handbook actually matters. Emily laughed under her breath. He's going to learn. Rachel overheard the exchange as she passed by again. She stepped into the kitchen, her expression already irritated. Marcus, what's the problem now? The fries were old, Marcus answered. I'm making fresh ones. Rachel folded her arms. Use what's already there. Marcus looked directly at her. I wouldn't serve those to anyone. Rachel's eyes narrowed. It's one customer. Marcus shook his head. No, it's a guest. Rachel didn't respond immediately. She simply turned away with an annoyed sigh before leaving the kitchen. Her silence said enough. Across the dining room, Naomi continued waiting with remarkable patience. She glanced at the wall clock. 21 minutes had passed since placing a sandwich order. She could have walked to another restaurant, finished lunch, and returned by now. Instead, she remained exactly where she was, quietly observing. Every employee revealed something under pressure. Some revealed integrity. Others revealed character they never expected anyone to notice. Olivia Bennett watched Marcus through the opening above the kitchen pass. She noticed the fresh fries replacing the old ones. She noticed Jason shaking his head in frustration. Most importantly, she noticed the difference between the people trying to do the right thing and those determined to stop them. She reached into her purse and quietly unlocked her phone, not to record yet, but because instinct told her this story wasn't over. Marcus carefully plated the fresh meal and placed it onto the counter once more. Booth 12, he called again. This time, Emily walked over herself. She looked down at the neatly prepared sandwich before deliberately lifting the pickle from the plate and dropping it into the trash. She doesn't need the extra, she muttered with a smirk. Then, as she grabbed the tray, her elbow nudged the glass of iced tea waiting beside it. Brown liquid splashed across the edge of the plate and onto the serving tray. Emily frowned dramatically and looked toward Naomi. Loud enough for nearby customers to hear, she said, "Some people always end up making more work for everybody else." Naomi slowly stood from her booth, not because she was angry, but because she had finally seen enough. Marcus looked up from the kitchen. Olivia lowered her phone onto the table without taking her eyes off the scene, and several nearby customers instinctively turned toward the register. The entire dining room seemed to hold its breath as Naomi calmly picked up a stack of napkins, gently wiped the spilled tea from the edge of the tray herself, and offered Emily a polite smile that carried neither resentment nor fear, only the quiet confidence of someone who already knew exactly what would happen next. Emily set the tray down with exaggerated impatience, as though serving Naomi were an inconvenience instead of her job. "There," she said. "Happy now?" Naomi looked at the sandwich before lifting her eyes toward Emily. "Thank you," she replied softly. The simple courtesy seemed almost to disappoint Emily, who turned away without another word. Naomi examined the meal carefully. The bread was fresh. Marcus had made sure of that. The fries were hot now because he had refused to compromise. Yet the atmosphere surrounding the plate carried a bitterness no recipe could hide. She picked up one fry but stopped before taking a bite. Across the room, Jason watched her with folded arms, waiting for a complaint he could dismiss. Rachel stood near the office doorway pretending to organize paperwork while quietly observing the same table. Naomi slowly placed the fry back onto the plate. She wasn't thinking about lunch anymore. She was remembering another restaurant, another lifetime, another afternoon that had shaped everything she believed about dignity. She was 11 years old when her mother took her into a roadside diner after a church service. They had waited almost an hour while customers arriving after them were greeted, seated, and served. Naomi still remembered asking her mother why everyone else received their food first. Her mother had smiled gently despite the hurt in her own eyes and whispered, "Never let someone else's prejudice decide who you become." They eventually left without eating. Her mother never raised her voice. She simply held Naomi's hand and promised that one day they would build places where everyone would be welcomed with equal respect. That promise had become the foundation of Brooks Family Diner years later. Naomi blinked, returning to the present. The dining room looked peaceful, but the feeling in her chest had changed. It wasn't anger. It was disappointment. Not because strangers had underestimated her. She had lived with that her entire life. What hurt was knowing this was happening inside a company built to stand for the opposite. Olivia noticed Naomi's expression soften with quiet reflection instead of frustration. Whatever had just passed through her mind, it hadn't made her weaker. It had made her steadier. Marcus stepped out of the kitchen carrying fresh coffee for another table. As he passed Naomi's booth, their eyes met for only a second. He offered a barely noticeable nod, almost an apology without words. Naomi answered with the smallest smile. She understood. Not everyone inside the building had failed. Then Emily walked past again, speaking just loudly enough for Jason to hear. "Some people think being polite earns special treatment." Jason laughed. "Not today." Several nearby customers glanced at one another uncomfortably. The comments were becoming impossible to ignore. Olivia quietly opened the camera app on her phone, resting it face down beside her plate. She still wasn't recording, but she was ready if things became worse. Naomi reached into the pocket of her hoodie and wrapped her fingers around her phone. She didn't dial immediately. Instead, she looked around the dining room one last time. The families eating together, the elderly couple sharing pie, the young employees working honestly in the kitchen. This restaurant represented years of sacrifice, thousands of jobs, and a promise she had made to her late mother. If that promise had been broken, it deserved more than a confrontation. It deserved the truth. Naomi unlocked her phone, found one familiar contact at the top of her favorites list, and pressed the call button. When the line connected, she spoke only 5 calm words. "Danielle, begin Protocol 7 immediately." Naomi ended the call and gently placed her phone beside the untouched plate. Her expression never changed. She didn't glance toward Emily. She didn't stare at Jason. She simply reached for her iced tea and took one slow sip, as though nothing unusual had happened. Across town, Danielle Reed looked down at the caller ID before answering. Naomi never wasted words, and she never activated Protocol 7 unless something had gone deeply wrong. "I'm on it," Danielle replied before the call had even ended. Within seconds, she opened her encrypted operations dashboard from her laptop. Store number 214. Brooks Family Diner. Security status, active. Live camera access, enabled. Internal point of sale system, connected. She pressed one button. The restaurant's cloud archive immediately began preserving every camera angle from the previous hour, preventing any footage from being altered or deleted. A second command quietly copied all register activity, order timestamps, employee logins, and kitchen ticket history into a protected audit file. Back inside the diner, nothing appeared different. Customers continued eating. Waitresses refilled coffee. The lunch rush carried on exactly as before. Only Naomi knew that every second from this moment forward was being permanently documented. Emily leaned against the register and smirked toward Jason. "She finally gave up," she whispered. "Probably calling someone to complain." Jason laughed. "Good luck getting a refund for a sandwich." Neither of them realized that their own employee profiles had just been flagged for live administrative review. Marcus returned to the kitchen pass and quietly checked the ticket screen again. Something unusual caught his attention. Naomi's order history had suddenly become locked. That had never happened before. He frowned, unsure what it meant, but instinct told him someone outside the restaurant was now watching. Olivia noticed Naomi's remarkable calm. Most customers would have demanded a manager by now. Some would have left angry reviews online. Others would have stormed out entirely. Naomi did none of those things. She simply observed every interaction with the patience of someone collecting facts instead of emotions. Rachel emerged from the office carrying a clipboard. "Has booth 12 finished?" she asked. Emily shrugged. "Not really eating." Rachel looked across the dining room with visible annoyance. "If she's done, clear the table. We need the seat." Naomi heard every word. She slowly folded her napkin and placed it neatly beside the untouched sandwich. Then she stood. Emily smiled to herself, convinced the problem was walking out the front door. Instead, Naomi took only 3 measured steps before stopping near the center of the dining room. She looked around the restaurant one last time, taking in every detail she had once personally approved: the lighting, the booths, the framed photographs celebrating local communities. This place had been built to make strangers feel welcome. Somewhere along the way, a few employees had forgotten why it existed. Outside the front windows, a black executive SUV quietly pulled into the parking lot, followed moments later by another vehicle. Danielle stepped out carrying a slim tablet beneath one arm. Behind her came the company's regional operations director and a member of the corporate human resources team. None of them hurried. They walked with calm purpose toward the entrance. The bell above the diner door chimed softly as Danielle crossed the threshold. Emily glanced up briefly, assuming they were simply more customers. Then she recognized the company logo embroidered on Danielle's jacket, and for the first time that afternoon, the confident smile on her face began to disappear. The bell above the entrance rang softly as Danielle Reed stepped inside, followed by the regional operations director and a corporate human resources manager. Their business attire immediately caught Marcus's attention. Emily straightened her posture and forced the brightest smile she had worn all afternoon. "Welcome to Brooks Family Diner," she said cheerfully. "Table for 3? Danielle didn't answer. Her eyes moved across the dining room until they met Naomi's. With quiet respect, she walked directly toward her. Every conversation in the restaurant seemed to fade as the 3 corporate visitors stopped beside the woman everyone had mistaken for an ordinary customer. Danielle lowered her head slightly. "Good afternoon, Ms. Brooks." The words landed like thunder. Emily's smile froze. Jason blinked twice, convinced he had misheard. Rachel slowly lowered the clipboard in her hands. Naomi looked up calmly. "Good afternoon, Danielle." Danielle handed her a slim black tablet already displaying live security footage from inside the restaurant. Protocol 7 is active. All camera feeds, transaction records, employee communications, and kitchen timestamps have been secured. Naomi nodded once before standing. She didn't rush. She didn't raise her voice. She simply faced the employees who had spent the last hour deciding who deserved respect. Emily laughed nervously. "Wait, you're corporate?" Naomi held her gaze without anger. "No." A brief silence followed. "I founded Brooks Family Diner." Nobody moved. Jason's face drained of color. Rachel instinctively took one small step backward. Naomi reached into the pocket of her hoodie and removed a simple black access card. She placed it gently on the front counter. Emily stared as the silver lettering reflected beneath the lights. "Owner access." Her hands began to tremble. Naomi spoke with the same calm voice she had used while ordering lunch. "I didn't come here to test the sandwich." She paused just long enough for every employee to listen. "I came here to test your character." The dining room fell completely silent. Even the kitchen stopped moving. Marcus quietly removed his apron and walked closer, unsure whether he should stay or leave. Olivia slowly stood from her booth, phone still resting in her hand, unable to look away from the unfolding moment. Naomi turned the tablet so everyone behind the counter could see. One camera angle showed Emily marking her order as low priority. Another displayed Jason pushing newer tickets ahead of hers. Another captured the conversation about serving old fries. Timestamp after timestamp appeared beside each clip. There was no arguing with recorded truth. Jason swallowed hard. We were just joking." Naomi looked at him steadily. "Respect is never a joke to the person being denied it." Emily opened her mouth, but no words came. Rachel finally stepped forward. "Ms. Brooks, I'm sure there's been some misunderstanding." Naomi slowly shook her head. "A misunderstanding happens once." She glanced toward the frozen kitchen screen displaying the preserved order history. This happened repeatedly. Then she looked toward Marcus. One person chose integrity when it would have been easier to stay silent. Marcus lowered his eyes, embarrassed by the attention. Naomi smiled gently. Thank you. She turned back to the others. You believed I wasn't worth serving because of what you saw standing in front of you. Her voice remained composed, but every word carried unmistakable weight. You never imagined the woman in a hoodie was the one who signed your paychecks, built this company, and expected every guest to be treated with dignity. That assumption didn't expose who I am. It exposed who you chose to become. No one spoke. The silence inside Brooks' family diner carried more weight than any argument ever could. Danielle tapped the screen of her tablet, and almost instantly the point-of-sale terminals behind the counter flashed the same message in bright red letters. Access denied. Emily instinctively reached for the register. She entered her employee code once. Error. She tried again. Error. Jason hurried to the second terminal with the same result. Rachel pulled her manager card from her pocket and swiped it through the reader. The screen rejected her credentials before locking the system completely. What's happening? Emily whispered, panic replacing every trace of confidence. Danielle answered without emotion. Corporate administrative suspension is now active. She turned the tablet toward Naomi. Employee access has been revoked pending investigation. Naomi gave a slight nod. Thank you. Customers throughout the dining room watched in complete silence. Some exchanged surprised glances. Others simply stared, realizing they had witnessed something far larger than a customer complaint. Olivia quietly began recording, not out of curiosity anymore, but because she understood that moments like this reminded people why character mattered when nobody believed they were being watched. Rachel finally stepped forward. Ms. Brooks, please, let us explain. Naomi looked at her steadily. You already did. Rachel frowned in confusion. Naomi continued. You explained with every delayed order, every ignored policy, every excuse, every moment you chose convenience over fairness. Danielle opened another screen displaying the preserved timeline. Order number 4287 entered at 12:11 p.m. marked low priority 32 seconds later. For later orders intentionally advanced ahead of it. Kitchen instructions altered twice. Fresh food replaced with expired product recommendation. Employee conduct violations documented across multiple camera angles. Each sentence felt heavier than the last. Jason lowered his eyes to the floor. Emily's hands shook uncontrollably. Marcus remained quietly beside the kitchen entrance, saying nothing. Naomi turned toward him. Marcus Hill. He looked up. Yes, ma'am. Today you protected the standards this company was built on when it would have been easier to remain silent. Marcus swallowed hard. I just did what was right. Naomi smiled gently. That's exactly why people will trust you. She looked toward Danielle. Effective immediately, appoint Marcus acting restaurant manager until permanent leadership is finalized. Marcus stared in disbelief. Me? Danielle nodded. Congratulations. Several employees from the kitchen exchanged relieved smiles. They had watched Marcus defend quality for years. None seemed surprised by the decision. Rachel slowly removed the manager badge clipped to her shirt. Emily wiped tears from her face. Jason remained frozen beside the locked register, unable to look at anyone. Naomi walked calmly toward the front entrance before stopping beneath the framed company mission statement hanging near the door. She read it aloud. Every guest leaves respected. She turned back toward the room. Those words were never decoration. They were a promise. Her eyes moved across every employee still wearing the Brooks family diner uniform. A business can recover from a bad review. It can recover from a slow day. It can even recover from financial loss. But the moment people stop believing they will be treated with dignity, the business has already begun to fail. Nobody applauded. Nobody interrupted. They simply listened. Because for the first time that afternoon, everyone inside the diner understood that the greatest lesson had never been about who owned the restaurant. It had always been about how easily ordinary choices revealed extraordinary character. Naomi waited until Danielle finished documenting the final report before she walked back toward booth 12. Her sandwich was still sitting exactly where she had left it. The bread had cooled. The fries had lost their crispness. She looked at the untouched meal for a long moment before quietly smiling. Marcus, she called. He stepped forward immediately. Yes, Ms. Brooks. Would you make me one more turkey sandwich? Marcus nodded. I'd be honored. The same order, Naomi said gently. Only this time, make it the way you would serve your own family. I will. A few minutes later, Marcus returned carrying a fresh plate. The sandwich was perfectly prepared. The sweet potato fries were golden and steaming. He placed the meal in front of Naomi with quiet pride. Enjoy your lunch. Naomi thanked him before taking her very first bite of the afternoon. She closed her eyes for a brief second and smiled. Now that's the diner I remember. Soft laughter spread across the room, breaking the tension that had filled the restaurant for nearly an hour. Even some of the customers who had remained silent finally relaxed. Olivia lowered her phone and walked toward Naomi. Ms. Brooks, she said respectfully, I just wanted to thank you. Naomi looked up. For what? For showing everyone that power doesn't have to shout. Naomi smiled warmly. Real leadership rarely does. Danielle approached with the completed personnel documents. Everything has been finalized. Naomi nodded before standing one last time. Every employee still inside the diner instinctively looked toward her. She didn't speak as an owner protecting her investment. She spoke as someone remembering the promise she had made years ago beside her mother. When I was a little girl, she began, my mother taught me something I never forgot. She said people may judge your clothes, your skin, your neighborhood, or your job before they ever learn your name. But never allow someone else's prejudice to become your own character. The dining room remained completely silent. Naomi continued, some of you believe this afternoon became important because I own this company. She slowly shook her head. It became important the moment a guest was treated as though her dignity depended on how she looked. She glanced toward the company mission statement hanging near the entrance. Every person who walks through these doors deserves the same welcome, whether they're ordering a cup of coffee, applying for a job, cleaning the floors, or signing the payroll. Marcus looked around at his coworkers. Several quietly nodded. The lesson had reached far beyond those who had been disciplined. Naomi picked up her jacket and turned toward the exit. Just before opening the door, she looked back one final time. Anyone can learn recipes, she said calmly. Anyone can memorize procedures. But kindness, fairness, and respect are choices made long before a customer reaches the counter. She smiled gently. Protect those choices, and this diner will always succeed. Sunlight poured through the glass as Naomi stepped outside. The afternoon breeze carried the familiar smell of fresh bread from the kitchen behind her. Families continued eating. Children continued laughing. Inside, Marcus welcomed the next customer with a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Good afternoon, he said warmly. Welcome to Brooks Family Diner. We're glad you're here. And perhaps for the first time that day, those words truly meant exactly what they promised.